I'm 5 minutes into the second episode of Momentary Lily, which so far is as enjoyable as the first one. I want to talk about the way that Japan has aesthetically formalized schizophrenia. In Japan, I feel like they have a way of, without putting a like official label on something, nonetheless recognizing patterns and grouping themselves accordingly. This idea of denpa, for instance, that's like, hey, are you like an anime obsessed schizophrenic person with like mood disorders? Like here's a whole genre for you. It doesn't call itself schizophrenia, it calls itself denpa, but it's like if you are receiving signals, like it's almost more descriptive or like funnier in a way. It is, I guess, a way of keeping it funny. I bring all this up because this show is obviously incredibly denpa, and the opening theme. I didn't comment on this at episode 1, but the OP is nuts. It's like metalcore, denpa, akiba core. It I guess the closest comparison would be the Watamote opening, which is also a show about being a denpa, having a personality mood disorder. This song is even more manic than that one, even more like preposterous and nonsensical. And it really intrigues me the way that the songs, like the video starts off like kind of serious, and then when the drop comes in, like the heavy metal drop, is when it starts showing like the food stuff, and like the wacky cutesier side of the show. So already there's like that juxtaposition of the comforting moments and the tense moments, in the song, against the opposite in the visuals, which is interesting, and it works. It works weirdly. It definitely sets the tone of what this show is. Like, I think I'm surprised I didn't mention the OP when I talked about the first episode. I guess just because I didn't stop as I was going to record. But that was a big part of what made me want to watch the whole first episode, was just realizing the song was like that. Because this is my type of anime song. Like, I like the heavy metal anime openings almost always the most. I just think Japan does metal really well, especially metalcore. Japan does metalcore the best. And I love like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and all that shit. But what this really reminds me of is Lady Baby, who has never done a anime opening as far as I know. But Lady Baby started off as a band where it's two little Japanese girls and then this Australian, a white wrestler, like a 6.5 foot, like wrestler, who would dress up as a baby girl and be Lady Beard, because he's got a beard, but he dresses up in like baby girl aesthetics and pretends he's like literally a baby girl, like playing the character of a baby girl that does death metal vocals. And like originally, Lady Beard was like a gimmick character that would do like Katy Perry covers in Akihabara, and then teamed up with these two young Japanese girls, and they did this song that was pretty successful called Nippon Manju. And for like a while, that was their only song. A lot of the song is just like naming random snacks and like stuff that you can buy in Japan. It's like a tourism anthem, basically. And this opening song, like the way the lyrics are, reminds me a lot of Lady Baby. Eventually, Lady Beard left Lady Baby, and they took on a few more girl members, and like they are still an existing band. I think Lady Beard's done like occasional songs or shows with them, but when they started in the Lady Beard era was truly magical. They did a few songs. Gimme Money is a great music video as well. So anyways, that's what this made me think of. The opening scene of this episode is just all the girls like introducing themselves and their weapons, which I'm glad that this wasn't done in the first episode, because the first episode did a much better job of making me want to know these things instead of telling me them up front. And so when I got to the point of them introducing them, I was like actually curious. But the funnest part about this is the first girl, the kind of serious girl, talks about her weapon, and she says its name, and the other girl's like, "Oh, you named it." And she like kind of embarrassed, like, "Only out of necessity." And the other girl's like, "Yeah, it'd be a pain in the ass if I had to say, hey, kill that thing with that weapon you've got there, instead of using its name." And I, as a writer who always likes to conserve as many words as possible, couldn't help but put my hand up and say, you don't have to say that anything about the weapon. You could just say, kill that monster. You only have the one weapon. You don't need to specify what weapon you're killing it with. But of course, I immediately realized the logic is broken on purpose. That's the joke. So if anybody doesn't understand this show's sense of humor, this is the humor. Nobody points it out. There's not a Tsukomi, really. I think with this show, they're all kind of trading the role of Bokeh Tsukomi for each individual like gag. Somebody will say something, somebody else will sort of counter. But with this one, everyone in the group wants to name their weapon. They all want an excuse. Nobody's going to be the one to call it out. They're not trying to make fun of each other. I guess that's kind of what's unique about this show is with most of these group dynamic type shows, there's usually someone who is kind of the like making fun of everybody else, or there's just more. I guess with this, it just feels more balanced. It feels like there's little jabs they're taking at one another, but only because they think they can take. Nobody's trying to put anybody down in this group, which is part of what I like about the energy of the show so far. It is very friendly. It doesn't feel like there's not a sense of like the show's trying to mock you for who you are. If anything, it is trying to embrace you to be the freak you want to see, I think that's sort of what this show's trying to bring out and what I appreciate about it. And I guess I'll just keep watching the episode and see how I feel. All right, I've paused again right as they've suggested that a hot pot will solve everything before we get into the cooking segment. This show is better written than I expected. It does feel like it has a surprisingly sure handle on what it's trying to do, which, like, is kind of the biggest problem with anime original shows a lot of the time, is like they'll have a great setup, but then how they get from that to the ending is just like a bunch of nonsense or a bunch of boring shit. This show is curiously like not trying to have a gripping central narrative at all. There practically isn't one. It's side quests the show pretty much. I could see most people, like most American anime fans in particular, probably really won't like this. Like, this is definitely going to be a very niche series, but I'm surprised how much I enjoy it. It really does give me the feelings of, like, watching Hidamari Sketch or something, but, like, just with a fresh enough aesthetic. I mean, a big part of it is just that the characters aren't in high school, like, the fact that they are like young adults, but there's not like explicitly teenagers who are explicitly in a high school setting, like it just feels like something I can still relate to, and I don't feel like perilously disconnected from by age and experience. There's a strong sense that this show is about perceptiveness within a group, like how well these characters can kind of account for one another and their feelings, and there's some great subtlety in it. I mean, there's this scene where they're talking about how they want to go to this certain part of town, in part because there's a type of food they can't make that the main girl would be very distraught not to be able to make, right? Which is kind of just like a cutesy reason for what if we had a thing to do, But the group's like, but there's a boss monster over there. And on the one hand, the one girl gets excited, and the blonde girl's like, hey, but you, pink girl, you're really strong. Maybe we'll have no problem sweeping away this boss monster. But pink girl looks a little uncomfortable, and then One-san, the big booby girl, she stands up and says, you know what, nah, we're not doing that. Somebody could get hurt. Let's have a talk about it. I'm going to go find dinner. And then green-haired girl goes, oh, yeah, let me go with you. And immediately my thought is like, okay, so she did that because she saw that the other girl was uncomfortable. Like, if pink-haired girl had been like, fuck yeah, we're going for it, I don't think she would have responded that way. But she's like, well, if she's, not feeling it, I'm not feeling it. But she doesn't say it that way because she doesn't want to put it on her. She makes it her own thing. But she's really just giving her a chance to talk this over with blonde hair, and like, so pink hair asks blonde hair, like, why were you so enthusiastic? It seemed like you really wanted to go out there and do that. And then we learn, well, there's this girl who, was like my closest friend, and then she disappeared, and I'm trying to find her, and I want us to continue journeying just in case we ever, run into her. And hearing this kind of inspires pink hair, like, oh yeah, there is good reason to go out and fight and to exert this strength that we have in, in doing something. So now we have real reasons, like a deeper motivation to go and do this thing. But I like the way this was brought about, the way that this conflict in the group was handled, that like One-san took it off of pink hair's shoulders to be the one to outright say, no, we shouldn't do that, because she understands why she would feel pressured, and she doesn't want her to feel that pressure. But then Pink kind of is like, well, it's not that I didn't think it, she doesn't want it to be like completely counted out, because she kind of thinks maybe we could just beat this boss monster. Maybe there is a good enough reason beyond my little petty, wanting to eat this type of food. I just thought that was a well done scene. Now, the actual dialogue in this show is like not anything anyone would ever say. It's so emotionally driven. It just feels fantastical. It feels like all the characters exist inside of one brain space. And I'm going to get real extra denpa about this, because I feel like I could write a show like this. Because as a writer, I've designed a lot of casts. Like, regardless of never really finishing a lot of books, I have created the cast of a story a bunch of times. And there was a point in my late 20s where I was like going back through a lot of old writing I had, and like all these cast profiles I had, and just kind of recognizing that each character I've created kind of feels like a side of myself, or a combination of a couple sides of myself, like, and so I tend to view myself in terms of characters, in terms of like, okay, well, when I'm being this way, that's like this character. When I'm being this way, that's this character. When I'm being this way, that's like if both of those characters were doing something together, And this show feels that way because all the characters are they all have the same motivations, they're all trying to do the same thing. So even though they have different approaches and disagreements in certain areas, that all of that has to be worked through because they are a unit, like there's no ability for them to kind of exist independently of one another and the story keep working, So it feels like it's a show not just about like understanding other people in a group setting, but also like achieving unity within your own intention, like figuring out how to assess conflict within your own mind, where sometimes you might need to, shut out certain thoughts and focus in on something else and kind of interrogate yourself in these ways, and figure out your own motivations. So it feels like a writer putting themselves into like 6 different characters and creating a story about creating a story, about the nature of what they are doing. Which is almost all anime has some level of meta like that. It's almost always about anime. So this show has that too. I did not expect this show to inspire this many thoughts from me. And I'm sure nobody else did either, but I'm going to keep watching. Okay, if you're interested in this show and you're not watching it yet, this is the part where I recommend you go ahead and watch the first 2 episodes before you keep listening to this, because I'm going to have some major spoilers that I didn't expect to be saying that sentence. How could you possibly spoil a show with no plot? Well, let me tell you. This must be what having BPD feels like. Like, this is the most pathetic in the most perfect expression of bathos in anime, which is one of my favorite things that anime does, is to decide to express these like insane tone shifts, mood whiplash, just incongruent tones, because I think there are some people who really, in order to handle life, I think most people like put everything into categories, like very separate, distinct categories, where they're like, my violence is here and my cuteness is here, and these have nothing to do with each other. And then there's people like me where everything kind of just feels like one contiguous flow. It all has something to do with each other. And so it all just becomes like a mash in my mind. And so to me, this type of storytelling makes sense, even if it feels weird as fuck. Like it doesn't not feel strange to me to have these tone shifts and this crazy whiplash, but it feels strange the same way real life feels strange. It feels more believable to me because in real life you do have, the puerile next to the exalted. You have the dramatic next to the silly. Like it can't be helped. Like reality is too chaotic for it to maintain a mood all the time. And anime sometimes just really embraces that. Really, really embraces that. This show has truly embraced that. So first, let me get the technical details out of the way, right? Because I talked a lot about the animation in the first episode. Animation's way better in this episode. By that I mean more consistent. There's just less failure. Like it accomplishes probably the same amount of great animation. It just doesn't then try to do twice as much and fail. Like there is a normal amount of anime animation in this. Like there's more shots of characters kind of just standing there talking and not like moving a ton unnecessarily from like a crazy camera angle with a wild perspective. There is still a lot of that. But surprisingly, most of it's done well. Most of it works. Most of the animation looks great in this episode. There are moments that legitimately look awesome. I think the aesthetic holds up for this show just because the story is kind of built around it. It feels like, it feels like they created a show that would make sense looking this way, in as much as it makes sense at all. So here's what happens in the second half of this episode. As Pink Hair had said, she said a hot pot will fix everything, and it does immediately. Okay, so I left out this detail when I was talking earlier about the conversation between Pink Hair and Blonde Girl. Blonde Girl says that she doesn't consider anybody a friend. She won't be friends with anyone because ever since she lost her only friend, she doesn't want to get close to people and consider them a friend. She doesn't want to feel that sense of loss. Understandable. I get that. I have abandonment issues too. So when they're having the hot pot, then One-san, who didn't want to go, was like, you know what? I want to be true friends with you because I've realized through eating this hot pot that eating it with friends is what makes it so great. And so, if we can be better friends by me helping you with your mission, then that will, it'll be even sweeter the next time we all have hot pot together. Sure, I can get behind that emotional logic, right? She wants to do something for her friend, even if it's dangerous, even if it's, potentially not the best idea. Now, based on the tone of this show so far, and of the fact that the action feels mostly meaningless so far, you would think this was just going to be like they kick everything's ass and then they move on and have another good time. And at first it's kind of going that way. Like there's all this cool animation, they're kicking everything's ass. But then we get to this scene where One-chan has basically been distracting this like high-level enemy while they fight the other high-level enemy all by herself. And then a second one starts attacking her and she gets trapped. And the scene, there's like a clear moment where it crosses a threshold into uncomfortable. Where like it starts off as like, haha, she's under attack. Okay, guys, hurry up and show up, right? But the bad guys, they keep hammering on her, and she's like, all right, guys. And then finally she like snaps, and she's like, where the fuck is everyone? You have abandoned me. I'm gonna die. And like she starts freaking out. She's crying. She's begging for mother. She's crawling on the ground trying to escape. And the scene goes on and on. The enemies are like really coming after her, and it starts to make you think like, holy fuck, is she gonna die? Like, are they pulling a Madoka? Is she actually about to die? And then it gets like so pathetic that it feels like, well, she can't possibly die because this would just be too fucking sad. Like, this would be really, really sad. And then you start coming around to like, maybe it's just gonna be that fucked. Like maybe this show is taking a really, really dark turn. Finally, the teammates show up. And they start fending off the enemies. And there's a moment where One-chan, she wakes up and she thinks she's seeing her mom, but she's calling out to Mama. But then she realizes, oh, it's actually Yuri, the blonde-haired girl. And in that moment, just based on how that shot looked, I thought, oh, they might kill blonde-haired girl instead. Because it looked like she could get speared through right then and there. But they don't do it right then and there. They wait just long enough that I got comfortable again, and then they killed her off. And I was like, motherfucker, how did I let myself stop thinking that was about to happen? Because it got comfortable again. The characters start, they had their banter. It felt like the scene was leading towards we're about to win. And then, bam, they spike you with it. So blonde girl dies, and they do the whole. It's a whole serious death scene. Everybody's shouting at her like, "We are your friends," like fuck you. You can't. You don't get to decide. We were your friends, She dies in their arms as they're all crying. I think this was very cleverly written, because it sets you up with the feeling that somebody can die, just because showing One-chan getting that pathetic. If nobody had died, that would have been actually super weird. Like, it would have been such a weird place to go tonally to then just like come back from, that it created this unsettling feeling through the whole rest of the scene. But if nobody had died, you would have thought, okay, this show is trying to fuck with me, but it's not trying to kill anybody, But it does kill somebody, and they spared you from like the darkest, most pathetic death that could have happened in the episode. But it sets you up with the expectation that like, we're going to see some shit, like we're going to see these characters suffer. We're going to see them die. And this is a 13 episode original anime. They're probably all gonna die. Now, granted, in the next episode preview, it looked like there was another one. Like, maybe they just find another clone of this blonde girl. Like, maybe each of these girls gets reprinted when they die, like a fucking sky crawlers. I don't know. I don't know what the meta is yet. But in as much as these first two episodes, we've already had a major character death faster than Madoka Magica. So we're pretty much setting the tone for something that is actually very grim and dark. Something that will actually be kind of shocking and sad at times. But like, again, the weird part and the effective part to me is that the death wasn't the really unsettling part of the episode. It was watching One-san like really like lose faith in her friends and in life. Like, she really thinks she's going to die, and she's just desperately like clawing for life, pleading, begging, like terrified. Those are some real ass feelings. And when I was saying that this show feels to me like it's very Denpa, I feel, and that like also this is somebody, going through like their own emotions. Like, I'm sure that this is a level of desperation people feel regardlessly of being in this type of situation, or even there's people who are just in situations that feel like they are life or death all the time, where you feel like if somebody doesn't swoop in and save you, you are about to fucking die and you are totally losing your mind. And then it could be that the very next moment, once those people swoop in, suddenly everything's fine. But then somebody dies, and then it's like now you're in a whole new headspace, and like it again, it just represents the chaos of living in a world that is chaotic while also being chaotic. Having a personality that is kind of hard to read or hard to communicate with, and also being in a situation that's hard to read and hard to communicate with. It's the double down of chaos. I'm enjoying it. I think this is a show for people like me, uh, and maybe nobody else. But this is what I come to anime for: is this type of ridiculousness. And I came to realize this is like from the same directing team as K, same character designer. So this is Gohan's best and brightest, and I like what they're giving me so far. I know it's gonna take a while for this one's reputation to improve. I think like it's got less than a 6 on my anime list. I think that will change. Like the episode scores for episode 2 were really high, so anybody who has bothered making it through episode 2 is really enjoying the show. Anybody who didn't make it to episode 2 probably thinks it's like a goof and a gaff and a laugh. But I suspect that once the show is over, and Mal only counts scores that have like from people who've seen at least a third of the show, I think it will probably improve the score if everybody who finishes it likes it, assuming it doesn't turn into a clusterfuck in the bad way before it's over. But I don't know, this is fun so far. Let me know what you think in the comments. And check out all my stuff on Linktree. As always, I'm Trixie the Golden Witch, anime forever.